Hey, it's KR from D&D Homebrew, talking today about homebrewing magic items to make them stand out from the ones that you typically see in the source books, the manuals of whatever system that you're running. And, I tend to think of the D&D style or Pathfinder or something related, but I think this can relate to other systems because it is a little bit system agnostic, the ideas that I'm talking about, because okay, you have your items that give you pluses for things. Plus 1 sword, plus 1 chain, plus 1 ring of protection. They give you AC, they give you bonuses to hit. Maybe, goggles that let your spells be more effective again, and then abilities, they let you see farther or things close up or all that kind of stuff, boots of speed. Those are all generic items that help abilities, attack bonuses, all the math of the game. And then you get into the extraordinary ability of flying carpet or flying, broom or, the little figurines that grow up into things. I mean, we can go down the list. When you're homebrewing, are you just going to you look through the figurines in your system? And you can do this and go, oh, there's no snail or let's say slug. What can a slug do, right? So this slug animates and becomes huge and like envelops some person. It moves with incredible speed. I'm just making this up, right? So you can sit there and think, well, what has not been covered in my system in the books, the main core manual, supplements, or whatever, what kind of figurine, and I'll just do that. And that's possible. And that's kind of sometimes what we can do that with homebrewed items because we have a template of the other objects. So that is one way. You can create something that's just totally off the wall, like the slug of, figurine. But I tend to think of like what things are not covered as much in some of the treasure books that I see in some of the systems I play and have played. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about here. So one of them is that items grow in their power as the player grows. And what this infers is there's a little bit more of a symbiotic relationship, such that you get a magic sword, it's +1. It isn't just necessarily when you get to 6th level, it's +2. When you get to 10th level, it's +3. Because again, in a lot of systems, by the time you're getting 6th, 10th, this is why a +1 sword isn't that valuable at these higher levels, because you've got such a bonus anyway, right? And a lot of times your hits are magic and all that stuff. So then you're just adding on more pluses that now you're even more ridiculously overpowered or whatever. What I'm talking about is suddenly, as the sword becomes a custom, this is sort of a limited sentience. It doesn't have to be a sword. It could be a wand. It can be a ring. It can be anything that's usable either all the time or once per day or whatever. It's not consumable. It stays with you, such that it has something that as you get higher and higher in level and use the item, and you could just say how many times do they use it, but you don't want them to necessarily, because then they're going to just start using it for ridiculous reasons. So let's just stick to levels. Right? I'm creating this I have the bullet points for all these things that I write down, but then I start to think about them as I make my video, as is my want. Anyone who's watched them knows I do that. So you grow, and suddenly, it's not suddenly, but you get to a certain level and the sword starts to have an empathy. It gives you clues as to the intentions of your opponents, or it gives you a clue as to some weakness that they might have or some area that you might strike them, such that you can do some extra damage or, and again, it doesn't do this all the time, but, especially when under certain circumstances or something, again, I'm just thinking about this where as you grow, the item grows. And what happens too with this is, let's stick with the sword example. There's a little tinge of a sentience that is the power of the magic itself. As the user, this thing becomes part of their I could not even think about going anywhere without, Stormbringer, the sword, the name sword. And so this growth comes out of the power in that magic of the user, and the item being attuned together, working together for such a long period of time. And there's another aspect to this in which the item becomes like modular, sort of like in Pathfinder, these runes. The runes are what you put on swords, you put on armor and cloaks and different things. These runes have power in addition to magic items themselves. But imagine a sword which then has areas for, let's call them, let's just say jewels, magic opals that you can either collect, maybe they can be made, but you see that these spots for these opals and those items that things can be put in them. And it isn't just necessarily making it a +2 or 3 or 4 like a striking rune in Pathfinder, but some capability, something that as you grow as a fighter, a tracking thing to track uh your foes, or in the wild, or a survival thing, or being able to see a great distance, that all that kind of stuff that you would utilize out in the wilderness. And as a fighter, as a person out, it could be you've a scimitar, let's say, which is kind of like piratey. Maybe you have these emeralds that go in there that can then give you seamanship skills, or something related to water. Water breathing, of course, is one. I don't know. I'd more like a trident, right? But you see where I'm going with this. The item itself is customizable, or it's modular in such a way that it can be enhanced. So it isn't just so much that it's with you and attuned, but you're also going out and getting things for it, and changing it that way. Another aspect is the magic item itself, something unusual. And one of the things I talked about, nobody watched it, but I talked about magic food, right? Sustaining you, whatever. But things like a magic feather. You see a magic feather and you think either it's going to let me fly, or I'm going to get a feather fall out of it once per day, which is a possibility. But it could also give you some affinity to birds of some kind, some limited communication, which birds can be really useful. If you've got some ability to communicate and see what they've seen, or have them fly around, maybe birds, you have a bird companion, something like that. But you think about an item in the world that, if it's infused with magic, what might that be? I think we call these sort of talisman or fetish, if there's something like that. But it's something unusual, a magic piece of bark. Now, the obvious idea is bark skin, right? We're always looking for protection in bad. But it could be other, again, communicate with plants, pass through plants, pretty powerful past in plants, but, once a week or something. I don't know. Because again, then the item is something that's unusual, that's something that's different, and the item can have some provenance. Like, where is this wood from? Is it sacred wood? This feather, what bird is it from that's such that it was? And is it, like a huge, peacock feather is gigantic. Is that easy to carry around as opposed to a little one? But that could be part of its thing. You got to pull this out of your pack and, wield the peacock feather in order to communicate or fly or feather fall or whatever that is. But you're thinking about unusual items to then bestow. And notice, again, I'm not saying that take the peacock feather and you can fly continuously for as long as you want. Well, that'd be pretty powerful, right? You could do that. Maybe if it grows as you're attuned to it, right? The first thing. But no, it allows you to fly for an hour. That's still pretty useful. The peacock feather or the feather fall. As you're falling off, you grab onto it and suddenly you've got the spell. Once per day, every other day, however you want to do that. So think about unusual items that have become magically enchanted. And the other element of this in terms of magic items is, what purpose does something serve in the world? Utilitarian items. So a magic plow, you would assume, right, plows at an extra rate. You give it to a farmer and he can do 20 times the work behind a horse. Okay, something like cuts through the earth. But the magic plow could also imbue the ground with some kind of magic such that crops grow better there. And again, the usefulness to a player character in the world, but depending on your system, but you see this magic plow and give them ideas. It grows crops that are, the yield on them is tremendous, or they provide sustenance in such a way that you can make hardtack rations for people and it lasts them for weeks. I don't know. I'm just saying, what can a magic plow do, right? A magic hammer that if you hammered it against an iron bar could, in like 5 times, would break it apart. It's magic, right? Even though the way this works usually is you either have to have something harder than the other thing, and then you have to have much more force. But in this case, it's magic. So a magic hammer, I guarantee you, your players will. You're going to codify it and say, what is the striking capability? Because hammers are used, big hammers as weapons. But this is, do you want to have that as a +1 or +2 hammer? Okay, but I think it's more interesting if it's much smaller, non-weapon, but it's magical and it can do things, it can strike things, break things, whatever, as a magic item. A magic lantern that sees through a darkness spell. A magic lantern that allows you some ability to see through, a wall of some type. Again, you can gaze on through and it looks almost like a veil, right? But you can see what's on the other side of the wall. Because a lantern allows you to see in the dark, to see in some place that ordinarily you couldn't see. And so you're thinking about what is a mundane item, like mundane, but that would be useful to have that item. Magic jewelry, ring, pendant, or whatever that helps you, in social situations. Gives you advantages on your, persuasion check or something like that, or gives you a higher charisma. My necklace of beauty, right, or something like that, or necklace of, what's another one? Now, this is a little bit silly, but just bear with me. Toothbrush of the silver tongue, right? Where I brush my teeth with it, and for an hour, I have tremendous persuasion powers. My smile is just, irresistible. This is the kind of thing where, because, social situations, you're trying to stress those all the time. So you realize, boy, when you come out of it, I just want to, whatever you say, I'm believing after you've brushed your teeth. Give them the toothbrush. It's magic. They're attuned to it. So then, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'll do anything you say. So that's something before the big, because I always have like diplomatic, encounters and stuff like that. And that would be a useful item to imbue with magic. And then you have the possibility of magic items whose powers either fluctuate or change or something like that. So let's tie something to the seasons. A druidic staff that in the spring, it has a grow plants kind of thing where you could have sort of an entanglement type thing if you want to get into combat stuff, or growing plants is in a more general idea. In the summer, the high summer, maybe something where plants can be, the burned, or you have some, again, this might be a call lightning kind of capability because summer is where we have the massive thunderstorms. In the fall, you have the decay and the sort of negative thing, or you could have, this sort of Indian summer kind of thing where you can revive something, revive a plant, vitalize a player, give them 10 hit points, right? And that occurs. And then in the winter, you'd have cold type things if you literally wanted to have an ice storm type capability. Again, whatever the power level is, but it fluctuates by seasons. Now, you got to be keeping track of times and have seasons in your world. But if you do a standard, let's say 12-month year, it goes 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. You gotta keep time. I keep time in my world, so that's not a problem, but whether or not you do or not. But it can also be phases of the moon. It can literally be day or night if you want it, depending on what the item does and its powers and whatnot. But the items that change or fluctuate or, over some period of time or over different conditions, whether it's weather conditions, time of the year, that is something that you don't see very often, and it's something that can be really interested when you think it through. In fact, I think I'm gonna create some. I'm always thinking of stuff to create for my Patreon. So now I'm gonna do, fluctuating items. And these are just, again, these are ideas where if you're gonna homebrew items, and it doesn't just have to either be ridiculously powerful or just another, a +1, um, sap or something like that, or +1 boxing gloves. I don't know. When people start just the pluses and stuff, think of something creative, think of something useful to the item, and think of items that change, that alter, or that have personalities that come out. And a shout out to my Patreon supporters. You're the guys that inspire the videos where I'm always homebrewing all these items and thinking about them. So thank you for that. Love to hear about items that you've created. And of course, like the video, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Give me some comments. And of course, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you like, and keep crafting magic items and tell somebody else about it.